I hope your 2025 is off to an amazing start. And I did a mix of audio and physically listening to this. There's so many tabs in this book. Bum, bum, bum. There's something about her writing that I wholly connect to. Romance with weightiness is where my heart hangs. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse, and welcome to some more 2024 year-end content. So today we are going to dive into part one of some of my favorite books of the year. So I narrowed this list down to, I want to say it's like 19. Not going to force a 20. There's so many books I love. So I already did my debut post. If you guys haven't seen that one debut video, I will post that one for you. But these are a whole bunch of books that just held a special place in my heart this year. So I read 86 books this year. I did 54, I want to say 52 books from 2024 and then 2 books that were released in 2025. So got a little jump on the year. So I've talked about this like all year long. So much of my reading taste this year, so much of my mood has gravitated toward new releases. So you will not be surprised to find, I'm looking at one stack over there. One of those is a backlist book, and that might be it. I think every book is a 2024 or 2025 release with the exception of one, which fully deserves its place on this list. So anyway, I'm going to break this up into 2 parts. I'm really going to try not to do synopses of all of the books. I have talked about almost all of these already. There is a final reading wrap up for 2024 coming your way. And anyway, let's just dive right into it because it's going to be a long day of filming for me. For those of you who love long form content, it's going to be some long videos for you. So let's dive right in. So I am going to start with 2025 releases, the first of which is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. This is the Book of the Month edition. Thank you, Book of the Month. And this technically comes out mid-January, unless you already got your hands on a copy. So I am a huge fan of Alice Feeney. I had very high expectations for this book and it did not disappoint. I loved it. We have a missing person, a missing wife in this case. I've also realized as I'm compiling year-end information, I have a lot of missing people vibes going on. I don't know. I seem to have been in certain moods this year. But in this one, we are following Grady Green. He is a writer, love. And when the book opens, he is on the phone with his wife, Abby. She's on her way home. And she winds up getting out of her car to investigate something. And he's like, don't get out of the car, come straight home. And then Abby never comes home. So when Grady finds her car on a cliffside, doors open, all of her stuff is inside, like her cell phone is still inside, but she is nowhere to be found. And a year later, she's still nowhere to be found. And his life has basically completely fallen apart in the wake of her disappearance. So he is struggling to write a new book. His agent is like, I'm going to send you to this remote Scottish island where a former writer friend of mine had a cabin. Go there, write your book, like get it together, go kind of find your peace and get your mojo back. And he goes, brings the dog, a little bit reluctant, but also like a little bit excited for a change of scene. And the unthinkable happens when he sees a woman who looks exactly like Abby. So what is going on in this remote Scottish island? What is going on with Abby? What is going on with Grady? Loved it. Just loved it, loved it, loved it. We get multiple POVs. We get multiple timelines. There's so many tabs in this book is how much I loved it. And Alice Feeney gets me every time. I thoroughly enjoy her writing. I thoroughly enjoy her darkness. She is one of my favorite authors for a reason. And I highly recommend this book. I think it's great. Also one of the best covers. Love it so much. And then another writer, if you guys watch my debut video, this is days later. I am so not doing well. Anyway, injured. Anyway, leaning. Anyway, Ashley Winstead. This book will bury me. This is the second book that I want to talk about. This comes out at the end of March. Out of Neck Alley Purgatory. Devoured the heck out of this book and I loved it. I am hard pressed to force rank her books, but I really, really would argue this might be one of my favorites. I feel like In My Dreams is still my favorite, but man, I loved this book. So this is about 5 amateur sleuths who are on the hunt for a killer in one of the most famous cases currently going on in the US, and they get themselves into a heap lot of danger. So we are following what is low-key inspired by the Idaho 4 murder case in Moscow, Idaho. So the 4 students who were brutally murdered, the case has not yet come to court yet. The trial has not started yet. The trial is supposed to start this summer. And Ashley Winstead was talking about how she was very much inspired by the reaction to this case from armchair detectives, like novice true crimers, the true crime obsessed community, how people descended on Moscow, Idaho, and sort of for a first time ever, there was this real community built around people rallying around these victims, trying to find the truth. People really clung to this in a way that had never been seen before. And she, Ashley, was really fascinated by the connection of the true crimers. So I talked about this in a different video. If you're familiar with Idaho, you will see things that are a bit familiar, the real case and the book. And if you're not at all familiar with Idaho, it doesn't matter. It's not a replica of the case, but you can see just little hints of where she took things from. But at its core, this book is about Jane Sharp. She is our main character. She is who we are seeing this story through. And in a very clever storytelling device, we are seeing this story in retrospect. So it's a year after this case has happened, and we are finally getting the story behind the story of what really happened from Jane's perspective. And Jane is dealing with the complicated grief, the sudden loss of her father, and she found community within this true crime community and found her way sort of into the darker side of the web. So similar to Rabbit Hole by Kate Brody, but different. But she winds up connecting with this group of 4 other amateur sleuths. And when this horrible murder breaks in Idaho, they are committed to being the people who are going to solve it. So we see the real complicated journey of dealing with her grief. We see the very sort of dark and messed up side of getting engulfed in the true crime community. And then we have murder to solve. And I loved it. This is a real emotionally packed book because the grief in this is so raw and it's like woven into this thriller, but you can see how what Jane is going through just informs so much of what she's doing and informs who she is as a character. And I just loved it. So Ashley Winstead, I would say probably her most personal book yet. Her own father had passed away. I really feel like she is channeling that into this book. And I just loved what she did. I love the writing in this. I love the story. I loved the characters. And sort of like classic Ashley, like it's just a great, twisty, fun thriller on top. So comes out end of March. I will have the exact pub date down below and just always highly recommend it. So fair warning, I'm going to be talking about this one a lot as we get into Q1 leading up to pub day. But that was my second 2025 book. And now we're going to jump into the 2024s. This whole pile is 2024 in no particular order. So the first book I have is The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. This is actually the first book that I read in 2024. I'm going to stumble over what year it is, probably 15 times. I love a Rachel Hawkins book. So I have read all of her adult thrillers. I have read some of her Aaron Sterling books, but I'm just such a huge fan of her writing style, her humor, her as a writer. I love author interviews with her. Like she is a writer that I definitely connect to. And she is someone who just, it's fun, it's bingey. She always grabs me from the jump and she likes to do some dark and messed up fun stuff at the same time. So obviously she's in my wheelhouse. And in this book, we have Ruby McTavish, Callahan Woodward, Miller Kenmore dies. And it says she's not only North Carolina's richest woman, she's also its most notorious. The victim of a famous kidnapping as a child and a widow 4 times over, she ruled the tiny town of Tavistock from Ashby House, her family's estate high in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So in the aftermath of Ruby's death, her adopted son, Cameron, wants very little to do with the family, any of it. Everything was basically left to him, but the rest of her family is sort of living at the house, but he has flown the coop, sort of manages things from afar. But then 10 years later, his uncle dies and he is forced to return home. So reluctant return home, which I love. Dark and messed up family dynamics. And Camden is bringing his new wife, Jules, with him. And she was not a part of any of Camden's past. So this is like a whole new world for her, getting brought into this like extremely dark and messed up family situation. And I love the dynamics of it. We get multiple timelines. So we see things from Ruby's perspective. So we get her whole backstory. There are interstitials, which are news reports. We get a lot of the background on her and sort of her legacy and her infamy. And then we get what's going on in the present. And there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of fighting for inheritance. There's a lot of resentment going on here. And it's just delicious, fantastic fun. So I will read anything Rachel Hawkins writes. Another absolutely gorgeous cover. And I thought it was fantastic. So loved it. It goes without saying, everything is fantastic on this list. I need to switch up the way I talk about books. Okay, now would it even be a year-end list if there wasn't a Riley Sager book on it? Probably not. Not for me. I just love him so much. So Middle of the Night was his release that came out this year. I also wound up getting an arc of this, which I devoured. I feel like I have so much distance between some of these books because I read them as arcs, but I just love him. There's no mistaking it. I don't even pretend to not be a total fangirl for Riley Sager. But to me, this is like classic Riley Sager in that we've got like thriller dancing with horror, dancing with supernatural, dancing with like what is actually going on here. So it's one of these books that really leaves us twisting and turning, trying to figure things out alongside his main character, Ethan. So in this book, 30 years ago, Ethan and his best friend Billy live in this nice Jersey, like suburban cul-de-sac, nice little family connections, and everybody's friends and all the neighbors know each other. And Ethan and Billy are camping in a tent in Ethan's backyard. And the next morning when Ethan wakes up, there is a slash through the tent and Billy is missing. And he's never seen again. Bum, bum, bum. And then 30 years later, Ethan makes the reluctant return home. His parents have kind of flown the coop for Florida, so Ethan comes to live at their house. And no sooner does Ethan show up that like real weird stuff starts happening. And he's kind of like, is this a prank or is Billy back? So one of the things I loved about this, listening to Riley Sager on book tour, was this was actually low-key inspired by something that happened with him. So looking out the window one night on his suburban cul-de-sac, he noticed that motion detectors were going off. So like the motion detector outside his neighbor's garage went off and like then it went dark. And then the next neighbor's motion detector went off and then it went dark. But there was nobody out there. And he was kind of like, Riley Sager was sort of like, ooh, this is really freaky. And like, this is kind of also a book. So he said this cul-de-sac is literally based on like where he lives. So all of his neighbors in real life are like their houses are the neighbors in this book. The only thing, my only gripe with this book is that there's no map of the neighborhood, which I would have loved. I love a neighborhood map. But we wind up getting past and present timelines, again, classic Sager. And the thing that is different about this book, which I probably should have led with, is this is the first time he is doing a male POV protagonist. So we did get the father's book in Home Before Dark, but it wasn't so much his POV the same way this is Ethan's POV. And I loved it. I think it totally worked. He definitely talks about how he like figures out the story first and then figures out who's the best person to tell the story. So I really enjoyed Ethan as a character. I loved the past and present timelines. We are getting neighbors and people in the community in the past and in the present, which I also love. And Ethan is just kind of losing his mind and trying to figure out what the heck happened. So we relive what happened in the past leading up to Billy's disappearance, and then we live the present, trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So you know me, you cannot go wrong with Riley Sager. And I think this is a fantastic place to start if you're looking for a place to start. I also loved the 90s timeline. There's like enough pop culture to ground you, but not so much that like you're drowning in it. And it just was like spot on. And I am of an age of Riley Sager, so I feel like that's why it also just completely hit for me. Just loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Okay, we're going to pivot to a love story, which is called How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwang. This is her debut. She is a screenwriter. She is a writer-director who's going to do Beach Read for Emily Henry. I just loved this book. I had expectations that I was going to enjoy it, and I was blown away by how much I loved this. I did a mix of audio and physically listening to this, physically reading this, because I couldn't get enough of it. And I just loved these characters. I loved the story. I loved the writing, the connection between them, the banter. It's humorous, it is gut-wrenching. This is the complicated grief book, and everything about this just worked for me. Like, to me, this is like a perfect book. And like steamy with the door open. I love a door open steam. I can do with like a fade to black, but I do appreciate when we get to be in the steam with them. And I feel like the relationship between the characters was just so perfectly done. It felt realistic, it felt believable, it felt logical, and just everything about this worked for me. So in this book, we have Helen. She is a very successful author, and her book series is getting made into a TV show. So she's leaving New York. She is coming to LA. She is part of the writer's room, which was sort of part of the deal. And when she gets there, she sees Grant Shepard in the writer's room. And Grant is someone she went to high school with, and Grant is someone she has a very complicated history with. So there is some friction between them to start. We find out what the thing is out of the gate, and we get to see their relationship develop, trying to work together. We get to see the entire writing room. I loved the behind the curtain of the process of it all, of getting the TV show made. And there was like such an authenticity to that. So you can see that like Yulin Kwong really brought her experience into this. And I just thought it was so fantastic. So family stuff, work stuff, relationship stuff, complicated grief, like I said, humor is really on point. It's just everything about this worked for me. And they just have to, you know, find their way in life and with each other and how to deal with things from the past. And I loved it. So we get both of their POVs in this. I thought the audio was fantastic. I thought the physical was fantastic. And I think she's just an outstanding writer. So I'm super excited to see what she does next. And I will absolutely read anything that she does next. But I think if you're a fan of Emily Henry, this will absolutely work for you. And I just would not hesitate to pick this one up. So if you're looking for like, you know me, like romance with weightiness is where my heart hangs, this is a great one. So it's light, but it's heavy. So it's not all one or the other, but it's just absolutely fantastic is the bottom line. It's great. It's great. It's great. It's great. So another book that is such fun humor, such a great story, I loved everything about it, is Everyone on This Train is a Suspect by Benjamin Stevenson. This is the second book in Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone series, Ernie Cunningham, but you can absolutely read this as a standalone if you want to. So the beauty of these books and the whole idea of these books is Ernie is a fourth wall breaking, knows all the rules of the game for solving a murder mystery, and he is walking us through it. He is giving us the clues. He is talking us through what's going on. He is pointing out what is fair play. He is pointing out like things that are unacceptable tropes in thrillers, unacceptable tropes in sequels. And one of the rules he plays by is he will not spoil book number 1 in the sequel just in case this is the first book anyone is picking up because it serves as a standalone. So it's such a great meta humor kind of a story, but also a fully fleshed out, very well plotted, wonderfully twisty murder. So in this book, we have 5 writers who have been invited aboard the Gone, which is apparently a very famous train. I say apparently because I didn't know anything about it until I read this book. So it's the famous train that runs through the vast Australian desert. So Ernie was invited to join the Australian Mystery Writer Society conference festival that's partially hosted on this train. So you have the writers, you have guests of the writers, you have fans, and you have agents and editors. So like there's a lot of people on the train. And of course, as one would guess, one of the writers on the train winds up getting murdered during the course of this trip. And the whole concept is who better to solve a crime than a bunch of crime writers, but also who better to plot a crime than a bunch of crime writers. So I just loved it. This is one of the last books I read this year, and I laughed so many times. His humor is so spot on. And I love, like, he will definitely tell you, like, hey, I don't figure out who the murderer is until like chapter 31. And oh, there's going to be 2 dead bodies, but like, let's just get to the first one first. Like, he will tell you things that are happening without telling you things that are happening. Although in the first book, in the beginning, he is fully just like, hey, murders happen on these 5 pages. So if you want to jump ahead to the killings, go on and do that. It's just such an inventive way of telling stories, and I love it. Like, it just works so perfectly. And I wound up picking up Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret just to finish the trilogy because I wanted, that's a novella, but I wanted just more of Ernie after I finished this one. So I did wind up reading that one as well, but love this entire series. I would absolutely recommend starting here if you want to. I think I kind of liked this better than the first book, which is saying a lot because I loved the first book, and it's totally, they're all worth reading. Absolutely worth reading. But I loved this one. Loved so much. Such a fantastic book. And then another book, which is such a fantastic book, is First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. This was a book that I heard so much pre-buzz about and immediately pre-ordered it because I wanted to get it. I wanted to read it. I wanted to know all of the things. And I loved this book. To me, this book was worth every ounce of hype it got before, during, and after its release. It is like grifter, con woman, trust no one, smart as all get out. I loved it. I want this to be a TV show. Like, I want to see everything about this. I want to read everything else that Ashley Elston is going to write. This was her adult debut. So if you did catch my debut video, I talked about how I was going to bend the rules to include something like this, but we're just going to leave her here where she belongs in my favorites of the year. So in this one, we are following Evie Porter. And it says, she has everything a nice Southern girl could want. A doting boyfriend, a house with a white picket fence, a tight group of friends. But the only catch is Evie Porter doesn't exist. So she works for the elusive Mr. Smith. And it says the identity comes first. Evie Porter. Once she's given a name and a location by her mysterious boss, she learns everything there is to know about the town and the people in it. Then comes the mark, Ryan Sumner. The last piece of the puzzle is the job. So she is working a con and things happen. I feel like you don't want to know anything else going into it. I loved it. I loved Evie. I loved her friends. I loved this entire story. I loved the premise. I loved the unfolding. We get past and present timelines. And so the big thing that happens very early on in this book, which is kind of like the core premise of it, is Evie is at a party with her Mark, and she meets a woman who introduces herself with Evie's real name, which is a name that Evie has fiercely protected. It is one that nobody knows, and all of a sudden this woman has shown up as her. So like, what the heck is going on? It's just so brilliant. It's fun. It's got great writing, great page turning, great twists and turns, fantastic characters. Again, I loved the unfolding of the past and present timeline, and Evie is absolutely somebody that I cheer for, and I think this is just an absolutely brilliant story. So cheers to Ashley Elston. Thank you for writing this book. Definitely one of the best books I read this year, which is why it's on the list. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I just, and I would love to see more of Evie as a character. I don't know. I feel like she could be an entire series. So I don't know what's going to happen on that front, but absolutely loved it. Absolutely recommend it. One of my favorite books of the year. And then the last book I'm going to talk about in part one is The Night We Lost Him by Laura Dave. So if you guys have been following my channel for a while, or if you watch my most anticipated book videos, like a huge story in my head about this, how this was the sequel to The Last Thing He Told Me, because in that book, like, Hannah's husband disappears, and then I was like, oh, and then I knew there's going to be a sequel to it, so I'm like, this is about the night we lost him, like the night he disappeared. This has nothing to do with that book. So I quickly pumped the brakes on that, but it still makes me laugh that I had no idea what this book was about. Despite, this is like the auto by author syndrome. I don't care what it's about. I'm going to read something by my authors that I absolutely love. So totally standalone book, totally independent of all of her other stories. And it was absolutely fantastic. So this is about estranged siblings trying to deal with the death of their father. So this is about Nora and Sam and their father, Liam, who Nora is his daughter from his first marriage. Sam and his brother Tommy are sons from his second marriage, and then he had a third marriage without children. But their father, Liam, very strategically kind of kept his families apart. So they knew about each other, but it's not like it wasn't like a Brady Bunch situation where everybody was like hanging out and growing up together. So Liam has died tragically. He fell off the cliffside of his house in California, which is horribly tragic. And in Sam's point of view, absolutely not an accident. Sam thinks something sinister is afoot, and he wants Nora to help him figure out what it is. So Nora is not really buying the narrative to begin with, but Sam is so desperate and clearly needs her help. Nora is still grappling with the loss of her father, so the two of them wind up working together to figure out what happened to Liam. So we get multiple POVs. We get Liam in the past. So this book kind of spans like 50 years, which normally would not be my go-to, but it really worked for me. I really enjoyed how this book was told, how the storytelling unfolded. And I feel like above all else, I loved Nora and Sam. I loved the dynamic between them. I do not have a brother, but the way that I felt like this is what it would feel like to have a brother, from like the understanding of the mutual loss that they're going through, to the fighting, to like just the sibling stuff that comes out of this. And they are each in relationships. There's complications in their personal lives. They have them trying to navigate what's going on, slash, like, as they're finding stuff out about their father. And it really just pulled me in from the start. The connection between them and the chemistry between them, I thought was so well written, was so well done. I'm hooked, like fell in love with this book out of the jump in a way that I did not expect to, and plowed through it, like needed it. So I talked about this in my review, which may or may not have gone up by this time. Julia Whalen did the audiobook of this. I had the arc of it from Libro FM, or like the early release from eLibro. And probably like a chapter into it, I was like, I need to go buy this book. I absolutely love it. And then I was like, no, like just give it some time. Like maybe it will disappoint you, which I was like, she's not going to disappoint me. And sure enough, like halfway through, I was like, yep, I'm off buying the book, need to have it. Because there's just so many like fantastic lines in this. There's some stuff going on with Sam that I really related to. There's stuff going on with Nora that I really related to. And I just am so blown away by the way that Laura Dave can write a book. I've loved her since her debut, and there's something about her writing that I wholly connect to, and I just love. Like it's like reading something from a friend. Like she just has such a way with words that I love. It's so approachable, it's accessible, it's relatable, and the way she can like interweave this story and the family dynamics and the complications, I just thought it was brilliant. I just loved it so much. She also does a fantastic job with setting. Like she talks about places I've never been to, and you feel like you're right there. Like you can see it, you can smell it, you can feel it, whether it's the sand or the sun, or it's a street in the city, or like a brownstone in Brooklyn. Like it just, everything resonates the way she writes it, and I just think she's an absolutely brilliant author. So I am not making a read to zero list because it totally backfired last year, as all of my lists did. But I maybe am going to make a concerted effort to read some more Laura Dave next year, which is actually this year. So you know what I mean. Anyway, absolutely loved it. So that is my starting lineup. Again, these are in no particular order. I just stacked them on the dining room table and grabbed the first stack, and here we are. So let me know if you read any of these. Feel free to let me know some of your favorites of the year. I am going to instantly film part 2, so you guys are going to see that soon. But we're going to dive into the balance of my list for this year. And again, it was just a fantastic year of reading. And it was a fantastic year on the internet. So thank you to everyone for being here, for watching, for supporting my channel. And I would love for you to stick around for what's coming up next. So I will see you very soon in the next video. And until that very soon time, take care, everybody. I hope you're doing great. I hope you're reading fantastic books. I hope your 2025 is off to an amazing start. And it was like an exclamation point on the story. All right, I will talk to you guys later. Bye, everybody.